This week in enterprise security news, Semperis adds vulnerability assessment, security reporting, and auto remediation to its platform. AWS launches Amazon Honeycode to help quickly build mobile and web apps without programming. Ativo Networks advanced protection disrupts ransomware 2.0. Improved threat visibility, defense, and protection across social platforms with SafeGuard 7.6, and more. In the second segment, Greg Thomas, lead security engineer at Javion, talks about high trust compliance versus security and diversity in InfoSec. In our final segment, Franz Payer, CEO at Cyber Skyline, discusses cybersecurity hiring. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Detecting and responding to threats in the cloud is harder than doing it on-prem. Even when you do have the visibility you need, legacy security workflows weren't designed for the speed and complexity of cloud environments. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to spot threats across the hybrid attack surface, provide detailed investigation steps, and help you automate response. Request your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Welcome to episode 189 of Enterprise Security Weekly for July 1st to 2020. Even I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Matt Alderman on the lines remotely. Matt, welcome.
Good afternoon, Paul. Happy July. It's the second half of the year.
That's it. Make sure to celebrate the second half of the year that you join our Security Weekly mailing list for webcast and virtual training announcements and receive your personal invite to our Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe, clicking the join button. With all the recent changes to Black Hat and DEF CON, we realized that we can keep doing what we do best, host virtual podcasts. Proud to announce Hacker Summer Camp 2020, a Security Weekly virtual live streaming event, August 3rd through August 6th. To reserve your slot now, visit securityweekly.com/summercamp 2020. So if you are a security vendor or working for a security vendor and would like to reserve a slot to do an interview where we talk about why your product is awesome and help explain it to our audience, go to securityweekly.com/summercamp 2020. All righty.
Johnny did amazing work on those graphics.
Great graphics, Johnny. Nice work. I love it. Looks awesome. So now we're going to talk about the enterprise security news this week. Where do you want to start, Matt? Some good stuff.
Well, I added
Okay.
a couple stories. Yeah, there's a couple stories that I thought were interesting that kind of hit late last week, I think, and early this
I probably
week.
missed. I knew that, but I didn't go as back as far as I had wanted to because going through 2 weeks of news is laborious.
I know. Yeah, it's tough. But the first one is the Tanium raise, right? Tanium raised another $100 million. It looks like Salesforce was the one that brought most of that money in. And what's interesting in that is, look, we've covered the endpoint space for a long time. We know who the major players are. This is another big cash infusion. They took $200 million previously, another $100 million, puts their valuation at $9 billion. At some point, you expect Tanium to probably file for an IPO and come out on the public market.
It's an interesting valuation at $9 billion.
Yeah, I mean,
certainly not the largest, right?
True.
I mean, but
yeah, CrowdStrike, for their IPO, what were they, 12, 15 million, something like that? I think they were valued at the IPO.
Right. It's a good comparison being an endpoint company.
Yeah, I agree.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then the second one is privacy software company OneTrust acquires Integris, which is a data discovery and classification. So OneTrust really focuses more on the privacy side. It really started with GDPR Now you have CCPA coming into enforcement now that we're in July. And so they acquire Integris to help with some of the discovery and classification capabilities tied in with some of the privacy stuff from OneTrust. Interesting to see where some of these products go.
I'm excited about the Semperis announcement adding vulnerability assessment, security reporting, and auto remediation to its DSP, which they describe as a directory services protector. One of the nice things when we briefed with Semperis a year or two ago, or it was a while ago, but I'm really impressed with their technology to be able to back up your Active Directory, and not just back it up, but restore it as well and overcome some of the shortcomings and interesting challenges you might have if you're faced with backing up and restoring an entire Active Directory tree or multiple ones, right? Because a lot of companies don't have just one. You've got multiple ones, and they might have trust relationships between them, and some might be hosted locally on premises or in the cloud. And how do you do the restore and backup from one platform to another? In other words, an on-premise backup, restoring that to the cloud. From what I understood, that was where Semperis really added value, was allowing you to do that the built-in tools didn't do that. If my memory serves me correctly, if you're listening from Semperis and you want to correct me, please do. But I'm excited about now, since they have all of that knowledge about your Active Directory, why not provide some monitoring to your Active Directory tree? It kind of reminded me of Javelin, right? And that really continuous monitoring and ability to do remediation within Active Directory is awesome. And Javelin did a great job with that, right? Had a great exit with Symantec. So to see Semperis delving more into the security side is encouraging for me, because I mean, AD security is still a thing, obviously, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting now that they've added the security capability to their platform. Is this filling a gap that Javelin and Symantec, are kind of open back up in the marketplace? Because we know what's happened. I think it was a great exit for Javelin to go to Symantec, but then with Symantec's break up into two pieces and the commercial side being bought by Broadcom,
I think it's slowed a lot of their go-to-market, right? Because I haven't heard about. It doesn't come on our radar that they've got awesome products and there's no buzz about it anymore, which is kind of sad, because the team is still, from what I understand, the team is still there and they're awesome. You had Guy and several others. I mean, they're just absolute ninjas with Active Directory and created an awesome product that solved people's problems, which is what we love, right?
Yeah, but I think it's just with the Broadcom acquisition, there's been a lot of what's happening with Symantec, a lot of changes over there at the leadership level across the board. So obviously Semperis sees kind of an opening to bring more security capabilities to Active Directory, probably to fill some of that gap.
Yeah, awesome stuff. What else?
Oh, we can go lots of different directions.
This the social platform one, I thought of ZeroFox when I was reading this article, but is this a ZeroFox competitor? Is that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, because I was thinking the same thing, Paul. I'm looking at this going, it sounds a lot like ZeroFox, right? I mean, because ZeroFox was really one of the first ones out really looking at the social media platforms and putting different protections in place around the different social media properties. So yeah, this looks like a competitor to ZeroFox.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like what I liked about ZeroFox was the active protection, right? Like not just trying to spin off of threat feeds, which you should do, which there's value in that as well. But I liked the kind of like active monitoring component to ZeroFox. So you can get things earlier in the cycle rather than like after stuff has happened, is the way I understood it. So I'd be interested to see, a demo from SafeGuard and see what they've got going on, because, this is more and more of a thing that I think enterprises have to adopt. And there's a lot of different use cases that I think recent events with protests and riots and global pandemics that have occurred this year, social media monitoring is becoming more important for just business continuity and intel in general, that you might make different decisions based on physical security, based on people working from home, and cybersecurity. I think it's good stuff, and it's going to open up a lot of opportunity if used correctly.
Yeah, we're also seeing a lot of attacks shift off also over to the social media platforms in SMS and other types of services. So we can't think about just phishing as an email problem anymore. You see it on the social media platforms. You're seeing it through text and other chat services, right? So, things are shifting, and as we use more of that technology, it's definitely going to continue to be an attack area that has to be protected.
Absolutely. Let's see. CodeFresh raises $27 million in funding.
Yeah, I was trying to get through this one and try to figure out kind of what they're doing. It looks like a CI/CD pipeline company trying to bring a lot of the pieces of building out your coding environment all into a single place. We see a lot of technologies here. There's a lot of open source products here. There's different pieces, parts all over the place. So pretty crowded space, but they're raising money. On their website. There was a link. I didn't click on it to see what they were making the investments in. If I spent a little more time prepping this morning, I probably would have figured out it's probably sales and marketing, but could be something else.
Yeah, and I think it's, we actually talked about this, I think even last week, right? How there's so many different technologies and so many pieces in that CI/CD pipeline, and you can go get point solutions in all the areas where I think there's going to be a lot of market growth is in companies like this that can consolidate it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right. If they can consolidate it and integrate certain security kind of checks along the way,
right,
having that all-in-one solution and bringing it all together definitely has its advantages.
Well, I think they have to make it easier to do that, right? I mean, because I'm doing it today, right? I mean, if you look at them all as individual products and projects, it's the amount of time is, overwhelming. If someone can help make that a little easier, right, and satisfy requirements, that's going to be the hard part. Is everyone's CI/CD pipeline is different, and in fact, if you're a large enterprise and you've got 1,000 pieces of projects of software, each one might be different. So,
yeah, and that kind of ties into the second story with Puppet and Relay, which is kind of their event-driven automation platform. Again, can you tie some of these pieces together? Can you think of this as kind of SOAR for the software space?
Yeah.
Now you can do some event-driven automation, again, tying these different pieces together. So Relay is Puppet's new announcement to help try to integrate and automate aspects of the pipeline as well.
Yeah, and I think that, Puppet, Chef, and Ansible are all valid technologies to help, that CI/CD pipeline and integration and automation. And everyone's got a slightly different use case, for all of them. And you do see some of the parent companies making announcements, I think, to help further them into the enterprise, right? Because if you can get an enterprise using one out of those three, then you're good. Still a lot of manual work and integration, kind of the same thing, we talked about with CodeFresh.
Yeah. That one also then ties into AWS launches Amazon Honeycode to help you quickly build mobile and web apps without programming. So this was a pretty interesting announcement because what they're trying to do is allow applications to be built without coding. And so maybe this is something I should try out since I haven't coded in 20 some years, see how well it works. But my only concern here is we did a segment on Application Security Weekly on Monday. We were talking a little bit about these code pipelines from the cloud providers, right? They're providing a lot of service capabilities in building your code. But one of the things that's not inherently in these pipeline capabilities is security. And so I'm a little worried that we're going down the same path with this Honeycode, is that, it's great in order to build these apps very quickly, but where is security embedded in these types of coding platforms? And John Kinsella had written a post about where you should integrate different security components into the different platforms. He'll have to update it now for Honeycode, because I think that's potentially one of those gaps, is where security in this offering.
Because it doesn't say build secure mobile apps. It says build mobile apps, leaving that security piece up to you. And while you may not be writing code necessarily, there's code being generated in the background.
Absolutely.
And so that needs to be secure. That also needs to go into a pipeline, which also needs security around it, to John's point, right?
Yes. Yeah, and so just because I'm not doing any programming doesn't mean there's not code with binaries that have vulnerabilities embedded in them. How do you address those issues in something like a Honeycode offering if security isn't part of the main piece? Anyways, it's just something that has to be thought about. And look, to Amazon's point, they're like saying, hey, leverage my services, leverage my platform. I'll make it really, really easy to build code. Just may not be secure.
Yeah. Let's see. I wanted to talk about SaltStack announced SaltStack Enterprise 6.3, which is awesome.
Yeah, this was an interesting. We know Mayhew, SaltStack's been a sponsor, working on getting them back on the show. What's interesting about this announcement is these integrations, right? And so you've got, Splunk from a SIM perspective, you got Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7 from a vulnerability management perspective, and then Kenna is in this announcement, which is on the prioritization side. So if you think about what SaltStack has built in being able to identify some of the misconfigurations, now they're integrating in some logging capabilities, they're integrated in some vulnerability management and prioritization capabilities. And I think it's to help on the action side. If I really think about SaltStack's value proposition in this announcement is the ability to automate the remediation pieces. And so having these integrations and providing more contextual data for the automation makes sense. The one interesting overlap is that Qualys has VMDR and Rapid7 has some SOAR capabilities also in here. So, they're also overlapping and competing with parts of who they're integrating with.
Choose your own adventure. Where do you want to do the vulnerability or exposure identification? Where do you want to do the config management? And where do you want to do the remediation? Right?
Right.
It's basically where we're seeing the market go and have a lot of different options. And I think we were saying this last week or the week before, Matt, that it's hard when we talk about the three big VM vendors, it's hard to even build a database of checks that can compete, right? I mean, we did some analysis when we were at Tenable, and the vast amount of coverage you get from those very mature VM vendors, you can't just forget about that, right? Because I think there is value there, and integrations are where you're going to see a lot of folks going in terms of VM. Now, you can add stuff on top of that, and I think get pretty good coverage. Not that coverage is the only thing, but to me, there's a tolerance level, with coverage, right? Like how much can I know I'm not really checking for is the question, right? And that's going to vary per environment, systems, and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, and I think SaltStack brings some interesting configuration capabilities that augment some of the limitations that I think Tenable and Rapid7 have over a Qualys, for example, and really try to bring that other component to the table as well. But again, you're right, coverage gets a little challenging here in some respects. I think the three major VM players are so close. It's pittance, I think, differences. I mean, at least in the research that you and I had done previously. But when you add in the configuration component, I think that's where SaltStack also can provide a lot of additional value above and beyond what some of the core VM players are doing.
Absolutely. What else we got this week? Elastic Enterprise Search, tools to bring experiences to market quickly. Announcement from Elastic. Elastic Workplace Search and App Search with easy flexibility across platforms and global regions. I'm not quite sure exactly what that means.
Don't either. Okay. I wanted to cover the Ativo one, actually.
Okay. Well, we'll get Elastic to talk about their announcement as well. They're our sponsor.
Yeah, because they are a sponsor on PSW, so they can probably clarify some of that.
Absolutely. Which one did you want to go to?
The Ativo Networks announcement around ransomware. So I've been talking to Carolyn and the team over at Ativo, and they're doing some really interesting things with deception. We've talked a little bit about deception. I don't think we've had a couple interviews with various players in the space, and deception has some interesting potential use cases. And here's one where they use deception to really look at mitigating ransomware attacks, which I thought was interesting use case for deception. And what they've done is at the endpoint layer, they've added some capabilities here to mask certain access to the endpoint to prevent some of these ransomware attacks to actually get executed on the endpoint. So I thought it was an interesting way. They talk about how some of the EDR and EPPs don't really have some of those capabilities built into them. So I think this is kind of a partnership correlation with endpoint detection response and some of their deception technologies that provide some very interesting capabilities here.
What I find interesting, and they touch on this in the article, is what attackers do when they're trying to execute a ransomware attack. And what I find disturbing for me is you have a company that's the victim of ransomware, and they say, well, the attackers didn't get any PII, and I'm like, really? How do you know that? Because if they have access to your files to encrypt it, well, how do you know they didn't make a copy of it and exfiltrate it? And then you talk about DLP, or what did you do to detect that they exfiltrated the data or not before they encrypted it, right? And that's an interesting play for deception, right? To see that if there was a deceptive target that was maybe exfiltrated, you can probably keep closer tabs on that than you could actual data, because you're looking for attacker behavior, right?
Right.
In deception, and purposely setting up so that an attacker will access that. And so I think that's an interesting play, because the trend that we've been seeing in ransomware is the double whammy of, yep, we got your data, and by the way, we encrypted of it, but we have a copy of it, and you can monetize twice off that or more if you want.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, not only am I getting monetization to give you the encryption key to get your data back, I also have your data, so I'm going to go sell it on the dark web as well, since I have it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then
we all know the limitations of the DLP solutions that are out there to detect against some of this as well. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my point. Let's see. This Dahua Technologies. Have you heard of these folks before?
No, I had not, and I didn't get a chance to do a deep enough dive into what they were providing at all.
They're doing some kind of networking. The internet, Ethernet through P2P or IP can be operated remotely, blah, blah, blah. I didn't read that one in any great detail either. So interesting on the networking side. Threat Quotient is integrating with Intel 471 cybercrime intelligence, more threat feed kind of stuff, which is interesting. I'm seeing a lot of organizations still, somewhat struggling with what feeds they bring in and how to make that data actionable. I haven't caught up with Threat Quotient in some time, but I think that there's an increasing number of feeds that are available, and evaluating which ones you should use is still a challenge for many enterprises. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, we've had sponsors like Recorded Future in the past that were aggregating a lot of this data together as kind of a main feed into your SIM and some of the other stuff. This announcement's a little interesting though, Paul, because they're trying to integrate with some of the cyber crime intelligence data that's more closed source. And so I think there is some very interesting value. I think it's going to be very industry specific though, where you see specific types of cyber crimes, like maybe against the financials, the insurers, maybe the healthcare industry. You correlate the threat data that Threat Quotient has with this cyber crime closed source data, might provide a little more insight into what are the active attacks and what are the active cyber criminals doing at the time that might help you prioritize. But again, it has to make it easier from an actionability perspective for it to provide value. So I think, it'd be interesting to see how people adopt this integration and see kind of the results that they get from this correlated data.
Yeah, I think, when I think about this particular challenge, you could almost end up with a set of data from feeds that completely is not relevant or useful, right? But if you change where those feeds are coming from and maybe how you're using it, it can have a tremendous amount of value. And I think that's where, some of the struggles are with threat intelligence, is tuning it basically for your organization. And there's multiple layers, like, Threat Quotient is importing all those feeds, and then there's other feeds you may go directly to, and there's open source feeds. So kind of interesting.
Yep. And then you have your shared feeds from the different ISACs, right, that potentially play in here as well. But what was interesting about Intel 471 is it's a closed source. So, having access to some of this data might provide some additional value, and probably that's why Threat Quotient did the integration.
Absolutely. That'll round out the news for this week. Stay tuned. Interview coming up next.